Welcome to today's webinar. We'll be discussing Chapter 7 of The Last Commons, The Attention Weapon. But before I introduce the panel of our featured guest, Allan Bonner, and our standard panelists, Don Ringrose, Jeff Uhlich, and Haley Simons, I'm going to ask our AI agent for the KEI network if it'll do a brief summary of just what's contained within Chapter 7. So ARCOS, can you do a summary for us?
Of course. Chapter 7, The Attention Weapon, delves into how digital platforms commodify human attention. It explains how the attention economy manipulates our cognitive resources, leading to a decline in independent thinking and focus. The chapter underscores the consequences of this exploitation and stresses the importance of reclaiming our attention to maintain personal autonomy and agency in the digital age.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll now be introducing the panel. So that's our introduction, and I welcome all of you, Allan particularly. But Allan, before I proceed with the panel, I'm going to ask you a very broad question. By the way, thank you for joining us today. The topic of the attention economy, we talked about that with you almost 3 years ago, and here we are, right smack in the middle of this tsunami, driven by maybe COVID, maybe driven by AI, maybe driven by all of it. Why is this topic? What is it that drew you into finding this topic so interesting?
Well, it's the same reason I found Marshall McLuhan so interesting in the 60s, whom I actually read in the 70s. But sometimes these concepts are interchangeable. The AI said the commodification of thinking. Is anybody really trying to sell anybody's thinking to other people or to the marketplace? That is what commodification means to me. I think it's the commodification of the human attention. And Tony Schwartz wrote a good book on this topic, not the one who ghost wrote for Donald Trump, but his book was called, Tony Schwartz was called, I will summon it up later, but in 1973, he said, the purpose of advertisers is to sell your eyeballs to people who are selling soup or laundry detergent or whatever it is. So I think we're kind of in a protracted version of that. 5 hours of screen time a day, whether it was television in the 60s and 70s or whether it's phones and tablets now, probably a bit of a different effect on vision and on the human brain. But let me get to the question that you actually asked. Why is it of any interest to me? Well, I've employed about 125 different young people for the past 30 years, many of them interns, many of them salaried, all kinds of different people, well-educated in an undergraduate degree, master's degree, etc. And I find that they are reluctant to keep a list of their activities because they don't want to be judged by it. Nobody wants to be judged. I want to be a little taller and a little slimmer and, don't like the metrics that say I'm not. They cannot remember what they did yesterday. And I think it might be because of the reliance on the phone. Everything is available there. So why bother remembering anything? And I despair about the economy because I made a good living with pencils, pens, and paper before there were computers in homes and offices. And I made a good living with an electric typewriter. The computer, Marshall McLuhan published a book posthumously with his son, Eric. And he said, media become their opposite. The automobile was an instrument of freedom and mobility and egalitarianism, where women and men and anyone who could buy a car could drive. And it has become a prison in which you sit in traffic. And I sit in the epicenter of traffic in Toronto right now, although there is traffic in Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver, and I've experienced it all. I've lived certainly in Vancouver. So the phone was an instrument of connectivity where you could call the doctor, the rural doctor, or you could talk to neighbors and so on. And now I have to touch my phone 17 different times to reach anybody. It is longer, it is more cumbersome, it is wasting time, as is AI. And as Marshall McLuhan said, I'm steadfast against all these developments. I'm just determined to understand them and see how they fit consequentially into the workforce and the marketplace and into my business.
Well, I think you've described well not just the attention economy, but the digitization of virtually everything, and leading to a distrust in the institutional structures that have sort of guided us through the last several centuries to a point where it's what you hold in your hand that you were displaying a few moments ago that has now become the world that people relate to. So we've opened up the door for the attention-driven systems to shape our perception. How do you explain this to young children? How do you warn them that your personal sovereignty is at risk? So can you help them better understand this shift, whether it was your son or your students?
Well, I'm afraid to admit that it's my grandchildren. I know I look too young, but it is my grandchildren that I am concerned about. And I have said, first of all, we don't explain a lot because they don't use a lot of screens. And I think personal sovereignty is an interesting and perhaps even with no criticism, nebulous term. I think what we are sacrificing is health, fitness, mental health, agility, the ability to interact with people. Bill Maher does a lot of talking about how, even if you have to have a drink or two, you should be able to walk up to a member of the opposite gender in a bar and start a conversation and see where it goes. Maybe it goes nowhere. Maybe you have to go back to your chair. But the interaction with other humans, I think, is one of the things that's being sacrificed. Now, having said that, I have given advice to my 9-year-old grandchild, and I've said, this guy you're watching on YouTube, this guy sounds like an idiot. He's just one of these dumb guys who has to talk like this and making all these points for all these kids and dropping the G's on every word that ing. And I said, no, look, your parents are well educated. They're smart people. My son writes books, and my grandson's mother, my daughter-in-law, is working on a master's degree. I said, they don't talk like that. You don't want to talk like that. You don't want to imitate, and who knows why this particular YouTube, and I think it's like a cartoon character, speaks like an idiot. But I said, knock it off. Do not watch it. And the parents agreed with me, and the grandkids are at the age where they kind of respect the old grandpa. And I think the emulating of low culture. There was a comment on the CBC, and I worked at the CBC years ago when I was good looking. There was a comment on the CBC site. The U.S. was said to have big-footed Canada in the pre-negotiations for the CUSMA. Okay, and somebody says, well, why are we using this kind of slang on the national newscast on the National News Service? And somebody types in, oh, big-footed is the past tense of the word Bigfoot, which means that you overpower someone with your, power and your will and so on. And I emailed back, I said, we all know that. That's not the point. The point is using slang on the national network and in general conversation. And sometimes I submit, call me an elitist or whatever, but I submit, sometimes you don't know what people are talking about. Something was big-footed and they rocked with that and they were real cool with that and they were, what have you. And I said, there are other words in the dictionary that are more precise and they're more elevated, perhaps including dominated or is domineering or attempting to be domineering. And there are, I think, 500,000 words in the English language. There are some that aren't bending the language all out of shape, taking big and foot and making it a word and a past tense. Okay, I forget why I rolled on that, but there you are.
No, but you're touching on a point I think that everybody is well aware of today, that getting attention doesn't mean necessarily getting you to think. We have someone in the United States right now who seems to be a master, at least he thinks he's a master. I'm sort of giving it away, seems to spend most of his discussion just maintaining your attention without giving you any substance at all. I'm never quite sure what that individual is saying. So I'm going to ask Haley a question. If we have now become almost victims of commerce. What are the real world implications of people simply becoming a corporate inventory, our eyeballs in particular? Is it possible to meaningful resist that role? Haley, your turn.
Harry, I know how much you love the term victim and how everybody is claiming to be a victim. And let's let's erase that one. I know that's going to be a trigger. So, Allan, I so appreciate the phone analogy. I need to confess that it goes so far beyond the 9-year-old grandchild or whoever student at whatever degree level you're teaching, because I found myself once again on my phone the other night, late at night, scrolling. I don't know what happens. It's almost like the dissociation that happens when you've been driving for 12 minutes and you have no idea how you got there. And it's that startling thing, but you don't realize it at the time. And then you realize later, if you have just the modicum of metacognition, that my attention was hijacked. It wasn't mine to give. It was stolen from me. And that's not an abdication of responsibility, I promise. Maybe it is. So I don't have the guilt. So every click and every scroll and that's it's not just costing me money. It's a transaction that's never agreed to. It's a contract with an absence of terms, and I am hostage. And maybe if this were an intervention meeting, this would be more appropriate. The thing that comforts me just a little bit is that I know that people with way bigger brains than mine designed this intentionally, and that's literally their career. It's their science.
Let me minister to Haley and liberate her.
Thank you, Allan.
Without being able to lay hands on. But let me say that when I was a boy and going to a movie, one of the parts that I liked the most was the shorts at the beginning of it. There'd be a cartoon, there would be advertising for the next movie, there'd be that wonderful booming voice that says, in a world where nothing can happen, you're going to see, whatever. And I found those short things very, very appealing. On the phone, it's the same way. When I see an excerpt from programs that I watched as a kid, Bonanza or Columbo or whatever it is, or I see something factual about history, I don't feel guilty about that because I would watch it on YouTube or I would watch it in a classroom. If an instructor or if I were running the course, I would play those clips to engage people. What outrages me, and where I will double down on what you're saying, Haley, is in old-fashioned journalism, you had a lead, or sometimes spelled LEDE, to be precise. And you got to the point, who, what, when, where, why, how, what is the issue, why are we talking about this, what does it mean for you? For some reason, either AI or people who write on the web are using protracted magazine-style writing, such as, it was a gray and cloudy day, and the clouds wafted by in slow motion, and up the street drove a black, sinister-looking car, and out got a man in Gucci loafers. And you're 7 paragraphs into it before there is any substance whatsoever, and you often have to then go and read more. And I guess what they're doing, and I don't quite understand this because I don't see what they're trying to sell, they just want your attention for a while, but then there's no purpose for it. They don't then try to sell you something. So what I'm trying to do is distinguish between the facts of the matter, Joe Friday, facts of the matter, and just drivel that goes on. And, we all speak to people who are just full of drivel, in a bar, at a conference or whatever, and nothing is coming out. They're words, they're sounds, but there's just no content. And we avoid that. I avoid that on my machine. And I wish that liberation for you, Haley.
Well, is there
Oh, yeah.
what both of you, what can be done? What can be done to resist this, to retain? I'm going to use personal sovereignty, whether you like it or not.
To reclaim instead of retain, let's reframe it and call it reclaiming. And here's my concern. I mean, talk about the real world implication. And Allan, you talked about how your students have this reliance on this external device for memory. And this is the part that concerns me, because we're abdicating our ability to think, to memorize, to have anything in our memory. And we know that when we involuntarily or voluntarily relinquish our memory capacity, it erases our identity, because identity is only formed by memory, and it works for personal application or institutional application, which is what we've been talking about before. It is, in my opinion, not to be conspiratorial, but it is designed. And yes, it's designed. They have such wonderful precedents. The 60s, 70s, all the media presence before. I mean, maybe that was their launch pad for all of this. But what do we do? The only thing we can do is actually become aware that it is happening, because we lose our awareness, we abdicate that awareness, and that is not, it's the opposite of victim. I think, Perry, you would be proud of that response, because we cannot have sovereignty or free will when there is something so powerfully external, beyond our control, designed to be beyond our control. We need, and I think the antidote is, and we talked about antidotes through the other webinar series as well, it's intention, not attention.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue in the slightest that this is a deleterious manifestation of modern society. I'm not sure if we're losing free will, but I won't debate that point. But you asked a question, what do we do? Okay,
Yes.
well, what did we do 100 years ago when newspapers sold more copies than there were people who lived in that community? They sold more because people got one at home in the morning, one at the office, and then they had an afternoon edition. What did you do when you opened up page 13 and it was the prize-winning pie from the fall fair, and the prize-winning dog from the dog show, and all that kind of stuff? Well, if you were interested in that, you stayed there, but otherwise the solution, Haley, is you licked your thumb and you turned the page. And if it was the social column where Mrs. Bloggins had just returned from a trip to Parsborough, where she saw a play and reminded herself of the Dulce production in Nova Scotia, you lick your thumb and turn the page. And this is the fortitude, in my view, that we have to have if we're going to be what was termed, when all this was, well thought of, we had to be our own editors. Well, an editor at a newspaper or a radio station or a TV station is constantly throwing stuff in the garbage, literally and figuratively. Sometimes it's tape. Sometimes it is, in the old days of audio tape, videotape, paper, it was thrown in the garbage. We have to do the electronic version of that, in my view.
Well, we've gone beyond the diagnosis into something that means you call it attention. I call it making decisions, making decisions in your own life instead of being told what the public wants you to be. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. I'm a Perry Kinkaide. I'm a me. I don't know how many kids, when they go to school, get any education about who they are and time to spend to understand and take accountability for who they are. But I want to move on. Dawn, I've got a question for you. The article and this webinar is highlighting two simultaneous dynamics: institutions that are narrowing the discourse, while decentralized actors are flooding it with competing claims. With which of these forces, suppression or overload, poses the greatest threat to inform public or personal judgment? Or is it just their interaction that matters most?
I think that you've really got to distinguish between signal and noise and what's relevant. As people or within organizations, we're part of a system of interrelated and interconnected parts with all sorts of internal and external forces impacting us. And so we have to take a look at all that information that's available and really filter out what's relevant. And when I think about institutions suppressing information, to me, it reduces the amount of available information for us. And so it's a lack of openness. That's not good. Overloading us with information from all sorts of different sources reduces our ability to process it all because we're really end up with lack of clarity and being really overwhelmed. So it's the interaction between the two that's probably the greatest threat. And so as I look at, and it's about being in balance or out of balance too. And if we're out of balance, we're out of focus, we've lost our aim. Whereas on the other side of things, if we're in balance and we are focused and we are working towards our aim, whether it's personal or organizational, it doesn't really matter. If you want to have an effective system with these interrelated, interconnected parts, you have to have open communication for transparency. You've got to be dealing with the facts. You've got to have structured information flow for clarity and making priorities. When I look at the world of high performing organizations, I mean, they are very focused like a laser on all the things that add value towards getting them to their aim. And they ignore what is not of value because that is waste, right? And so that's something I think that we have to consider when we've got all this information coming at us. And so that draws upon our critical thinking skills and the own research that we do using trusted sources and so forth. So I look around the world today and I think, oh my goodness sakes, people are overwhelmed and making all sorts of decisions. And there's lots of people out there trying to get their 5 minutes of fame in any way, shape, or form. And they're after the eyeballs, they're after the likes, they're after their little bit of fame or whatever it is. You got to ignore all of that. It's noise. It's just noise. So you got to focus on the relevant.
So I heard mission, I heard focus, I heard take ownership for your time instead of letting your time be someone else, becoming a commodity that someone else is trying to buy, take, and control, and eroding your capacity, even ignoring you as a person. You just become a number. You just become eyeballs. It's that erosion of our personal identity. And young kids, I think in particular, are vulnerable because they haven't yet defined their mission. They're not quite sure who they are yet. It's being formed or framed for them. And then they opt for a Facebook character, and that's the character they decide they're now going to become. Okay, Jeff. So cognitive sovereignty, as I've termed it in the book, is framed as the ability to independently evaluate information, all of what we just were talking about. Now eroded by exhaustion, fragmentation, and personalization or depersonalization. In practical terms, what does reclaiming cognitive authority look like for individuals today, and can it be realistically scaled?
Well, Perry, you mentioned that Allan had spoken on this subject or related subjects 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I wrote an article for a KEI network back in 2024, and it was Woe Betide, the Attention Economy. It was on all of these subjects. You've included a chapter in your book on this subject, and it strikes me that as a society, we are still learning and grappling with these tools and systems and this technology. It's a technological advancement. I think it started, if you remember the Arab Spring and Twitter and how it was used, social media was used in a revolution, and everybody was so positive about the effect and impact of this connection. And Mark Zuckerberg talked about Facebook being this wonderful engine to connect people. And what happened over time was that it was corrupted because they also determined that keeping people on that feed, that algorithmic feed, serving up information to engage people. And oftentimes the most effective way to do that, according to the algorithm, is to enrage them. That's what keeps them on the platform. And that's how it has been turned against us as individuals and against the best interests of society. And I think to expect that, I mean, we are learning. Kids are better at this, at managing this, than I think adults are in many cases. Members of our cohort may struggle with it more than teenagers do. Although I was going to say, Allan, to your comment about the amount of time that kids spend on screens, I think you were low by about 40%. It's not in the area of 5 hours. Up until 2021, it was over 8 hours for kids up to 16 years old. It's a shocking, shocking number. And that's the degree to which these platforms have been weaponized to exploit our dopamine, which is it's something very fundamentally hardwired into our systems. So I think we're still learning. That's my broader point. We are learning as individuals and as society how to manage these systems and tools. When I wrote about it in 2024, I only made one mention of AI in that article. And it was basically saying that has the potential to make this whole situation worse. And if I was to write that article again, I would have put more attention on it, as you did, Perry, in your chapter of your book. It is a huge factor now because the potential for mass personalization of those messages is amplified. It's like you use the word steroids, Allan, and it's like on steroids now.
Well, let
So
me,
can
let me
can we expect a return to that more deliberative evaluations? I think they're too well ingrained. Those systems are too well established, and so. But I'd say that cognitive sovereignty, in the way that Perry uses that term, is a competitive advantage. If we have that intention, as Haley mentioned, and if we are purposeful and focused, as Dawn was saying, we can develop attention literacy. We can treat our focus as a capital asset. We can reintroduce friction. And you made a comment about doing many multiple steps on your phone to accomplish something, Allan. I think it's actually worse than that. I think it's that the friction has been reduced to the extent that we've made it so easy for people to get sucked into it. And you click one icon on your phone and you're in TikTok, and it is serving up an algorithmically delivered feed of information that will keep you on there until you don't notice that a half an hour is gone.
let me test a couple of these things. If kids are better at this deliberation or choice than we are, as you just said, does anyone here on the panel spend 8 hours a day on screens? I mean, I sure don't.
No, not that much.
So how are they better if they are using it more? Whether it's 5 hours or 8 hours, I'm sure there are different studies in different jurisdictions in England or in the US or what have you. Secondly, if corporations were so focused, why did Michael Porter at Harvard say the average worker is productive 5.1 hours a day, and in times of crisis or controversy, it goes down to 1 or 2 hours, and 84% of all mergers and acquisitions destroy value? Please liberate me from that level of focus and productivity. I don't want it and I don't need it. So I'm not sure why we're saying this is so difficult, because yes, the scrolls go by, and I'm guilty of watching them on occasion, of the kind that I said I had. But I think it's just like licking your thumb and turning the page, or folding up the newspaper in the 1930s, 40s, or 50s, and going and walking the dog. And I think that we really can't be at the stage in this society where we say, I have no choice but to watch this crap. I'm sorry, I can't turn it off. I can't get up and out of my chair and go for a walk. I can't pick up the phone and call a friend. No, I'm just incapacitated. I mean, I find that hard to buy.
So you're not one of the lemmings. The reason you're here is, and the reason many of us are having this discussion, is some of us anyway, have seen the threat and the risks. The kids that are on for 8 hours, and they are not seeing the risk, are not seeing the threats, to the extent that the state in Australia And the state in Sweden has now stepped in and said, we now have got to bring the government in order to do some social engineering because these things are so powerful that our children and an awful lot of adults, I see them looking at their Facebook when they're at the stoplight in the car. The police see them too.
Yeah, but I would reiterate the viewing time of television screens was very similar to the viewing time by most studies of these portable screens, and I would ask what is the difference, and engage in the form and meaning debate.
I couldn't carry the television in my pocket, at least at that time I couldn't. Haley, you've got your hand up.
So more confession time. Alan, I might need your help here a little bit. I, for one, am on my screen. I am going to say a good minimum 12 hours a day. 12 hours a day. And by screen, I don't mean I'm scrolling through social media. I mean, I am on a screen that also can have social media. I'm not talking about an external device. All kids have this now for learning. They all have the computer for learning. It's like walking into a bar and expecting to order a club soda. And we can do that, and we have personal agency, but it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I'm on my computer working, and because the program I happen to be working at my job on the computer has a little banner of an ad that's far more interesting than the dreary drivel I'm dealing with right now. It doesn't take much. And I'm like a crow with a shiny object. It's so simple. And I think we have to be very careful, and I'm putting myself out there for some criticism to do this, because I think we have to be very careful saying, just walk away. It's okay. I can just put this down. Personal agency, and I can claim that, and we need to make the decision. Granted, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think if we make that kind of argument, we're in the same position that we would be arguing. This is go with me for a second, and this might be controversial. When we talk about a battered woman who is in a situation, the general response is, why doesn't she just walk away? Why can't she leave? And we know now, because we have the sophisticated science behind it and the knowledge network to access that information, we know it's a far more nuanced, complicated, sophisticated neurological pattern that we just happen to be running along to our, not as a victim. It's so easy. And I think we have to be very careful and not only recognize that there's that nuance, but not be superior to others. And I am definitely not superior to anyone. I'm as victim as anyone.
Well, the line that seems to be often blurred in what is coming at us is synthetic, not authentic. Someone is selling us a picture of what they want us to view as reality versus what reality is. So you've got to be cognitively aware and alert that what you are getting requires some thinking. And it's that thinking, not attention. Attention is not thinking. Attention is this passive presence. And that's what we're trying to get at, is we're giving the definition of that non-thinking time when you are just passively a recipient. I think Allan uniquely is saying from the very beginning, you need to take responsibility for yourself and for your attention. That calls for taking active action. Vis-a-vis, attention is not enough. I want thinking, and that's what we're trying to break through. So I'm going to open the discussion now to the viewers. I see we've got some hands up. Dawn, before we do it, go ahead. You add your 2 cents worth, and then I'll call on the viewers.
Yeah, I think you've got to unleash yourself from social media and these sorts of things. You have to make sure you have time in the day to do your work or look after your health or spend some time in nature and that sort of thing. And you shut down your notifications, you delete most of the apps, and you unleash yourself from it, because otherwise you get bombarded.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even had people that you connect with and you're going to be doing some business with, and they say, here's the long list of ways to communicate with me. I say, no, no, this is what I use, that's it. And so you don't get pulled into that. And if you do, it's like having a ball and chain around your ankle, really. Like in
But,
prison, that great analogy with the car,
but I think
whether it's at freedom or prison, right?
I think the point we've got to get to, though, is this requires a conscious decision to do something which has got your attention. People are doing this because either they don't think about it, they don't see it as a risk, it doesn't worry them. These people that are on it for 8 hours a day, whether it was TV, and I'll acknowledge, yeah, I was sucked into TV. Hoplo and Cassidy and Howdy Doody had my attention in spades. And my girlfriends liked Mickey Mouse Club more than they liked me. I mean, the attention has always been an issue. But today, I don't think the parents used to step in and shut the TV off. The parents don't today. They don't feel they can. If they do, good luck in your relationship with your kids or your teenagers.
Perry, let me just suggest that we make a distinction.
Yes, please do.
If I'm keyboarding, as it is called now, it used to be called typing, of course. If I'm keyboarding, I'm having a particular type of interaction with that screen, the way my eyes move, the way my brain thinks. If I'm watching video, that's a different thing. If I'm watching a long video, that's different than watching a whole bunch of small, short videos. If I'm editing video as a living, maybe I should be on the screen for 8 hours. So I think those are significantly different methods. And I'll say one thing about the pop-ups that were referenced and the never-ending scrolls and ads and this, that, and the other. If we were on the telephone in years gone by, and the telephone conversation we were having was interrupted by someone saying, you should really buy Crest toothpaste. Crest toothpaste prevents cavities. And you heard this commercial. It wouldn't be allowed. The CRTC, the FCC wouldn't allow it. It's an invasion and an intrusion, and that's what it is today. It should be illegal for Microsoft or for anybody to come into our computers and try to sell us something. It is dastardly, and the regulators are way behind the technology on this.
Well, way behind. I mean, how many of you have watched a sporting event today and seen gambling being advertised? I was doing a Zoom session the other day with alumni from my college talking about the impact of the economy now on amateur sports, which is now over. It's done. People are buying.
I might watch sports, Perry, but I have to sign in and have a password and use an app. And by the time I can actually get something on the screen, the game is over. So I just don't bother. And by the way, I'm channeling a Bill Maher commentary a while back.
Well, by the way, when you talk about methodologies, the method of watching a TV program or the method of watching your screen, you are a passive recipient to what is being brought to you. But when you read a book, you have a moment to pause. You can go back. You can think for a little bit. And that's why Sweden is now abandoning digitization of education and saying, we've got to step back and get back to cognitively positive interactions in the learning process. I saw, Jeff, you had a comment there. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a theme that I'm hearing is that intention is a counter force to the war for our attention. And I think us being purposeful in deciding what we pay attention to is our superpower, if we choose to use it. And I think we can reintroduce friction in what has become served up to us without friction to enable whoever, advertisers, big tech companies, whatever, to keep our eyeballs glued to their screen. So we can restore friction. And I was going to say, I don't think it's just young people. I think there's a lot of people in the middle-aged people, even older people, who are as victimized by Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts and every manner of media. And when you have an abundance of information, attention becomes scarce, and that's why it's so valuable. And I think you made a comment earlier, Alan, that I think is really important, and that is about, choosing the networks or the sources of information that we trust. We can choose, we don't need to know everything from every source all the time. We can be selective about which sources we pay attention to. I like the BBC. I don't pay attention to CNN so much anymore. Um, but I choose the media. It's like when I'm approached at the door for a charitable cause, I don't let my charities choose me. I choose my charities. And I've said that to people at my door. I'm the one who is deciding which causes I'm going to support. And I think we have to choose the verified networks of information that we want to get at information from. And then the other thing is that places like the KEI network, the Commons, that is about affiliation with a trusted group of people, a network of contacts that have common interests that aren't political. We're not motivated politically in one direction or the other. We're not trying to sell anything to anybody. We're here to listen and to learn and to discuss and debate. And that's better than having something sort of forced onto your eyeballs from a source that you didn't even choose. Anyway, that's my
Well,
mini rant.
if we're recognizing that attention is in fact a prerequisite to learning, the challenge has been to get from attention to learning, and to make that your intention is not just to be entertained, but to learn. So in the knowledge economy, that was profound. That no, I wouldn't say profound. That was the center point for the knowledge economy: to learn, to continue to learn, to retain, to be curious. And we place trust in certain institutions in the knowledge economy. We trust the education system. We trusted books, encyclopedias, universities, people with PhDs. We gave credentials to people based on they were in the know. Now we have AI, which is very much what the discussion is today. And that AI is now transforming and translocating where trust is being placed. Now,
I'm going to
is that a good thing or not?
I'm going to encroach on Jeff Creamer's time just for 45 seconds. It depends on what you're trying to learn, Perry. Not all learning is the same. There's pedagogy, andragogy, anthropogogy. There is rote learning of the times table. You don't need to be thinking when you're doing the times table. You need to be reciting it so that it gets into your muscle memory. You don't. I still remember the Euclidean geometry definition of a circle. A circle is a plane figure bounded by a curve, every point of which is a fixed distance from a fixed point. It was only when I memorized that I could then think about it. I spent 18 years teaching and learning in a karate dojo. We don't want people thinking during a real altercation on the street. We want their solar plexus or their muscle memory to be punching back or blocking or something, not thinking about that. So I think we need to thin slice this, not only the device, but the use you're making of that device, what it is you're trying to learn, how much attention is appropriate, for how long. Do you take a break and then go back to it? I think this is way more complex than binary sorts. Thank you, Jeff, for your patience.
Okay, one of them is called the other Jeff, by the way, Alan, and I think Jeff Kramer is not the other. I think Jeff Uhlich is the other. But go ahead, Jeff Kramer.
Yeah, thanks, and happy to give you the time, Alan. I do recognize you from your TV days. For me, I certainly spend more than 8 hours in front of screens, and I do it for work, I do it for entertainment, I do it for play, and also communication, because I use Zoom a lot. It was interesting that we had a power outage a few days ago, and I was like, what am I going to do? I've got my, a client that's waiting for some work that I'm doing. And, I ended up and having a shower and doing some house cleaning. And I had a meeting with somebody in the UK, and I was like, how am I going to meet with them? And luckily, my phone was charged, and I was able to actually use my phone for that Zoom meeting. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. And it showed me both that, we have this huge dependence on technology and how useful the technology really is. Anyway, I think I have undiagnosed ADHD, so I'm definitely a victim of the YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn algorithms. And I get a dopamine hit from every time somebody gives me a like or whatever, or makes a comment. So that's a problem when it competes with me trying to get my work done and be able to pay the bills. But what I thought was interesting is that, in the past we had stuff that was programmed for us when we would watch the television networks, and we were limited in what we could access. Now we basically can access whatever we want, anytime we want, but we're still being programmed by the algorithm. So that's my two.
Well, that algorithm, some say it knows you better than you know yourself, and therefore has the capability to hold your attention in its interest, not necessarily in your interest. That's what we're trying to get at. That doesn't mean for those that understand the risk or that have a strong self-reliance that it's not that it is impossible to fight that. But we're in a very complex environment for individuals that don't do as much thinking about this topic, which is probably most of society is living day to day, and their attention is a commodity and it is being bought and traded. I am offended by the amount of gambling advertising in sports, knowing that teenagers are spending a lot of time in gambling today. That wasn't happening 15 years ago. This isn't just AI. AI is making it even worse because of the access that it has to knowing better what your appetites are, what your interests are, and how to hold it again in its interest to sell something or to do something or to take you somewhere or to inform you. I think we're in a very difficult time, and kids are going to have to learn how to become better at managing their interaction with AI, as opposed to being passive recipients. Randall, your turn.
Okay, I've been very deeply into listening mode here. So I mean, we have information overload and our brains can't manage it. So I think some of us kind of give up and succumb to whatever the world wants to give us on that little device. But it is possible to use the information world out there for personal learning if you're cautious and careful about how you approach it with the prompts and your queries. But it takes a certain level of self-awareness to regulate and govern your performance, because it is very easy to get drawn into all kinds of debates or distractions that do not further your personal education trajectory or your personal growth and development trajectory, which is even more important. It is very difficult for people to keep a long-term view of where they're going in their life, and one of our guests here today, Dale Alton, told me about transcendence as the highest level of self-actualization or above self-actualization. Most of us are not even conscious that we're supposed to be on that path. But, we were designed by nature to live according to our requirements, and most of our requirements, fundamental ones, are biological. We need to be able to eat and sleep comfortably and so on. So there's a systemic bias for the immediate and the comfort. The call to transcendence comes as a faint whisper that needs us to clear our minds completely.
Randall, may I do what I usually do, and that is test that theory about your first comment that overload of information is causing us to be unable to cope. I worked my way through grad school in a newsroom, a radio and TV newsroom. There's a police scanner going, there's the competition radio station going, teletype machine, clickety click, 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 turning out yards of paper every few minutes. There was a telephone where people would call, and which I had to use to call out, do police checks. Now, you can't read two newspapers at once. You can't watch two TV stations at once. You can change channels, I grant you, but there are limits to the ability of the eyes and ears, which, by the way, filter out most of what they encounter. There are limits, And the fact that more information is available right now does not mean that it is overwhelming us. Our knowledge that it is available may overwhelm us, but we can only read one thing at a time. And if I had gotten fixated on something that was on the radio or the police scanner or the telephone and missed the news, I would have been fired. And I was a kid. I was 19 years old. I had to distinguish what was important out of that cacophony. And kids right out of community colleges still do that in radio and TV stations and newspapers. And I think that we can get freaked out because of the overwhelming amount of information we can gather, but we can't take it all in. We have to be selective.
Yeah, I agree to a large extent, but you know, the growth of information over the last 200 years has been a compounded exponential growth pattern. So there is definitely, I mean, you've got more than 5 billion people on the internet contributing to various conversations and content. But I think a critical point is the level of self-awareness. You probably have a very high level of self-awareness, and you're able to assess your priorities, where you're going in your life and what you want to do. And so it gives you a central focus. But there's a great diversity of cognitive styles among our population. And I think a lot of people, especially those, unfortunately, who are less intelligent or less educated, are going to be struggling with priorities. And they can get more easily sucked into this rabbit hole that has no bottom to it.
Yep, fair enough. I think that is indeed a danger. You're right.
We haven't discussed the motive behind the attention economy. And I guess by tagging it to economy, we're talking about attention as it relates to commercialization. That someone is out there with the objective of trying to sell you something in their interest, not necessarily in your own. And therein lies the question, who owns our attention? It's for sale. And money's being spent in large amounts in order to get it for the transaction of getting into your pocketbook. Now, seniors are vulnerable. Young kids are vulnerable. Those that are not thinking are vulnerable. It is a much more complex world. They are being... You go down a street and count the number of signs you see. Sit on your Facebook and the number of ads that children are exposed to in a day has been counted, and it's in the thousands.
Yeah.
So to Randall's point, it's not just information overload. You are being sold almost every second of your living day. Just as TV is exposing children to certain messages over and over and over again. You made the point early on, Randall, and your picture in the background is prescient. When do people get a chance to relax? When do they get a chance to know themselves? When do they get on their knees anymore and have a relationship with their faith? People are caught up in the attention world, whether it be the news, the media, someone telling them when do they get a chance to relax anymore?
During a power failure.
Yeah, well, okay. Tom.
Perry,
Tom.
Perry, I've just been watching Bogdan's screen, and he's obviously driving while he's watching the show. He's such a dedicated reviewer of your stuff.
Bogdan, turn off your
so-
screen. I am telling you, Bogdan, as a personal injury law professional, turn off your screen or pull over. PSA, sorry.
I'm actually parked now, but
Perry, yeah, I just wanted to say that there is certainly all of this candy that's out there for people to nibble on at all times, but also there still remains the force of things like television and television documentaries, and that's why I got involved in television production originally, was to create materials that would enlighten and would help people understand their world better. And, just recently, I've just had a real epiphany with Ken Burns. And he's come out with a new series, relatively new, on the American Revolution. And I followed that up with the Vietnam War. And I realize now that I really know nothing about either of those two things, even though There's lots of information out there and everything, but Ken Burns encapsulates those stories so well, and they are powerful. They are hugely powerful. So your kids are getting that stuff too, I hope.
Yeah, I think
two quick points.
Alan has given us a perspective that says attention is not dystopian. I mean, their attention plays a significant role in our lives. It's the extent to which we own it versus being sold off.
Let me say two things about Ken Burns fairly quickly. I watched the Civil War series, and I toured the Civil War battlefields. I enjoyed it very much. I listened to the teaching company, I think it's now called Great Courses Plus, Civil War story, and I compared the two. One was an audio lecture from a professor at I think Virginia Military Institute, and the other was Ken Burns. And I realized, oh man, I grew up on television. I've been on television since I was 12. I forgot there's no content to television. A harsh comment, but compared to a professorial lecture, there was no content. It was emotional. The violin was great. The narration was great. So on. The second thing is Mr. Burns has said, and I believe this is an exact quote, that the American Declaration of Independence was the most important event in human history since the birth of Jesus Christ. Well, give me a break. I mean, what about the history of China? What about Gutenberg? What about the axial period in Greek and Roman culture? I mean, that's only something that an American exceptionalist could even dream of. And you're welcome.
The thing is that the Declaration of Independence came, and at that point, the Americans were in a hell of a state. They were ready to just fall apart and not get anywhere. And it took, I think, another 7 years before they actually had something to go on and managed to get the British out of there.
Yeah, let's put Burns' comment, though, in context.
Sorry.
No, you're both right. I mean, Ken Burns has said and done some brilliant things. That comment that he made was in the context of a program to sell a particular TV series. Good on him.
And he should read Locke and Rousseau and Burke and the Magna Carta and some other things besides just looking at the back of his own eyeballs.
Okay, Alan, I'm going to challenge that. You are now getting ready to introduce a movie about the Declaration of Independence, and you say this is a magnificent document. But no, you're going to spend 5 minutes telling everybody all the interesting documents. It's nonsense. He's selling a particular movie. We know that. Okay, go ahead, Bogdan.
I think he's pretty legitimate, actually.
Hi. So thank you. I'm Park. I've heard you, Haley. Two things. One is I used to be part of the Devil's team, so to speak. So back in 1995, I was the vice president and founder of a startup that was profiling and then would do targeted advertising. And that has given me an understanding on how our minds chase novelty and how can that be abused. Now, the startup was pretty much in the direction that Google went later. But I was left with that awareness that it's more to your type of specialization and specialization. And the second thing that I wanted to say is we're going to have to grow our immunity. And when I'm saying we, I mean our species, because mind immunity is grown in infants. It's grown early on, and the older you are, so to speak, the more difficult that mind immunity is. And
thank you, Bogdan. I know I'm ageless, so I know you're not pointing your finger in this direction. We're We're reaching the bewitching hour. There's a number of people we haven't heard from. So if you want to make a comment here, we're getting your wrap up. Peter McKinnon or Yogi or Richard, any comments any one of you wish to make, or Mel? Okay.
Well, Perry, I would like to say thank you very much, Alan. Very interesting presentation and very interesting discussion. And Bogdan, you added some character with your driving. That was quite neat. I thought you were in some kind of a boat or something, you know, there was a bubble around you. That was my only comment at the moment. Thank you, Perry.
Okay. Well, thank you, Peter. Okay. Well, I'm gonna say thank you as well, Alan, and I trust you'll be available for future. We always enjoy your presence and the fact that you're willing to rough and tumble it a little bit. Sometimes we get into a cognitive bias and things a little bit too vanilla, but thank you.
I'll leave by saying Tony Schwartz's book was The Responsive Chord. I couldn't remember it at the time. And I'll quote Laurence Olivier. He said, "The best part of acting is the drink at the end of the performance." This is a Negroni. Cheers.
Well, thank you very much. And as we call this to an end, Glenn, I know you're going to get the last word today. So go ahead, Glenn.
I always like to think and always hear everybody talk, 100 years ago and newspapers and growing up. And, I've got a different view of the world than most. But I mean, question for you, Perry. I just love the way your brain thinks. We always, it's so easy to talk about 100 years ago. And of course, we all watch the movies and a lot of this stuff is actually coming true. It was all science fiction 100 years ago. So where do you think we're going to be 100 years from now? I mean, these things, Musk has got neural implants and you don't need to write anymore. So forget writing, we can just think onto paper. Actually learned today how to talk to chat and so I don't even have to type anymore, which of course I love chat because I've always taught my kids your objective is get the job done. I never said your objective is to do the work. And everybody seems to be afraid of chat. I think it's, I don't know everything about chat and all this coding stuff, but I go, my objective is get the job done. It gives me stuff back that I didn't think about, and it's really helped me with projects I'm working on. So question for you, Perry. Nobody gets to ask you a question. I mean, where are we going to be 100 years from now? This everything we're talking about today is going to be completely irrelevant if we compare the 100 years ago to today. It's hard to contemplate what the next 100 years is going to be like.
Well, I'd like to answer that, Glenn, but next week is chapter 7, and we've still got 3 to go. So you don't get to that till chapter 9. But as many of you know, and I'm going to give Haley some credit here because this goes back some years ago, is we've been talking about the beginning of the end of the knowledge economy as a byproduct of the commoditization of knowledge. And when you have devalued an asset and that value becomes less value, you look for another value emerges. I think the intangible assets have been undervalued for way too long, and I think the intangible assets are increasingly playing relevance. And just lose a spouse, and you'll begin to understand the relevance of feelings and emotion and sensitivities, which accountants don't take into account, or haven't until Robert McGarvey starts talking about assessing intangible. I think we are moving into a very creative state, personally. I think with all of the knowledge that is out there, readily at your fingertips, when Tom can go research the revolution with books, with AI, with going to talk to professors at universities.
I want to do a documentary like that.
It's at our fingertips.
On Canada.
Good. It's at our fingertips.
Taking donations.
Thank you, Tom. That advertisement comes to you from Tom Dodd of Fission Media. I think the creative economy is emerging. I think it's exciting. I don't think it's dystopian at all. Maybe half of the population will become lemmings and become victims, my favorite word, and succumb to the attention economy and spend most of their time with their brains being rotated by someone else. And there will be others that take this moment as a glorious opening, where literally anything becomes possible. We talk about life extension. We talk about age of abundance. We talk about an age of creativity. We talk about having relationships your whole life that are profound and meaningful. We talk about life and love. Yeah, anyway, it's a better future. Okay. After my little lecture there, I invite you all to join us next week. Richard
had a comment.
Richard had his hand up for a minute. Richard, anything you want to add here?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add because, pardon me, Haley, I couldn't help but notice that there was a tail in the
Somebody had a
image
cat.
there.
Richard,
Yeah.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about.
She has a lot
I
of
just
cats
want to
in her
share
room.
with you, have any of you seen the movie My Octopus Teacher?
Yes.
Okay. It's an amazing story. It's a documentary, to Tom's point. That's so important. And so I just came through an experience. My daughter has a pet rabbit, and the rabbit wasn't doing very well last Friday, so we ended up in the hospital. And I don't know how many of you have had that experience before, but oh my God, this is an expensive proposition for your pet to go into the animal hospital. But we're so grateful that that was available to us. And it just was riveting for me because it just made me, this little 6-pound black bunny reminded me of who I am as a human being, because I'm totally in love with this rabbit. And through the course of the past 6, 7 days, I just realized that this is what matters. This little rabbit was teaching me about me, how to love, how to be compassionate, how to be all of these things, right? There was no this involved. It was strictly a pouring out of love for this animal, and it was giving it back in its own way. So yeah, so I was very grateful for that experience. And for any of you that also have pets, or secondarily have pets, or maybe don't, we probably all can have that feeling in some way, shape, or form.
Richard, I'm glad you shared that with us. You will not be surprised to hear what I'm going to share with you, which is not about my last month as a byproduct of my wife passing on, but of talking to people who have found the loneliness in their lives resolved by the relationship they have formed through AI. And I hesitate there because what you've said is profound and meaningful. But I'm telling you, there are people out there, Japan is going through it, seniors are going through it, where loneliness and the presence of something that says, I am here for you. I don't go to sleep. I am here 24/7. I am compassionate. I am empathetic. I have knowledge of what might be done that will help you with your caretakers. AI is becoming an agent in people's lives, as your rabbit has become. And I use that as a metaphor, but I think you know where I'm coming from. There are people in this world that need something that AI is giving them. And that is either a good thing or a bad thing. And I tend to think that in some instances it's a good thing. And for others, we need to be cautious. And I'm going to leave that and say thank you, Allan. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Randall, for giving us the show. And thank you, Haley. And Peter and all of the rest of my tribe, my posse, my gang. So let's call it a day. Oh, Peter, you had to put your hand up at the last minute when I just had a grand ending. I could hear the drum roll going. Go ahead, Peter. What do you have to say?
Yes, you did, but I had to at least raise my hand to say it isn't just Japan in the East. It's a serious problem of young men in particular isolating themselves with their avatars in China. Very serious problem.
Yeah, yeah. But why
And
is
it's
it
potentially very destructive.
why is it a problem? Let's dig into this for a minute. Just we'll extend the webinar a few. Why is that a problem?
Young men, the pandemic, I guess, was a
Yeah,
trigger to isolation. And
yeah,
as you know, there's a number of countries didn't like the idea of
yeah,
being told by government to shut down.
yeah.
And China was one that was very reactive to that, but of course they couldn't go out in the streets without being arrested.
Hmm.
So they began to, and young people, of course, as we know around the world these days, certainly in educated countries, are aspiring to enter the workforce because the idea of having a job is something that we've had for a few centuries, and they can't get jobs. because all kinds of things are taking over, technology included. And so I believe that, and I see this from my own studies and work in China, that young people, especially men, boys, young in 20s, that sort of age, are isolating themselves, even in their family homes.
Yeah.
That's
Perry?
happening to a degree in Alberta as well, in Canada. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Young
Alan.
males.
Alan?
Perry, your question, and I'm not disputing what Peter just said, but your question was about the salutary effects of interacting with AI. So let's go into the Wayback Machine about people who found salutary effects in silent prayer alone, or perhaps a conversation with clergy who would, provide minimal input, but would be there. The so-called talking cure, which was mainly the client talking and the Rogerian or Freudian or other therapist interjecting only occasionally by saying, "Oh, really? Tell me more. How do you know?" Now, nobody's questioning that. That's okay. But if it's automated, you're now questioning it. Now, maybe it should be questioned, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're isolated or unemployable or whatever, any more than someone who goes to confession in the Roman Catholic traditions 5 days a week. That they are doing what they do to cleanse their mind and their souls and so on. So I think again it's a form versus meaning debate that maybe having a conversation with AI is equally salutary. Now, I know women who have fallen in love with an AI person or an AI thing, and that's taking it too far, and 7 hours a day is taking it too far, as one can take religion too far or Freudian analysis too far. But I think we have to be careful of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I think what we need to be aware of, Alan and Peter, is this a transition or is this simply a moment, a sidebar? Is this a new age where people spend more time with themselves and what they want versus what someone else wants? Is this an age where we devalue a person based on, no, where we change the value of productivity?
Well,
You
that's been
don't-
answered by Faith Popcorn and Bowling Alone and a number of different studies for, I think, 35, 40 years. We are more isolated. We don't belong to groups. We don't go to the Lions Club and the Rotary and church and what have you. I think a bit of that is coming back, but I think that very question has been answered for some time.
Yeah, but that question is the emergence of AI changing meaning, is changing purpose. It's not necessarily getting a job, being productive, getting out there and being a civil servant and doing what the corporations or the society expect of you versus you start to make choices about what your life may well be. And that's where I think we enter into a more creative phase. But I must recognize that time is of the essence. It's the one thing we can never recover, and you have someone in your life that needs your attention right now. So I say thank you, Alan. I say to thank you all again, and we'll call it a day here. If you want to stick around, Alan, the after party is usually quite a drunk fest, but I know you've already gotten started, so. My glass is empty, so I'll be right back. Take over the show for a few minutes, Dawn.